What's up guys, it's me Deshaun, and today we'll be talking about how strong Rudeus is from Mushoku Tensei. Now what makes Rudeus very different from your stereotypical main character would be that he doesn't simply overpower his opponents, he outthinks them, he outsmarts them, ultimately solving the puzzle in front of him and completing it with his versatile utility belt. He isn't your stereotypical broken knight class thief, swordsman, or whatever you might think of. He is a bona fide mage. The first thing that I'd like to talk about would be the elephant in the room when looking at Rudeus, and that would be the fact that he would share a lot of similarities with the demon god Laplace, who would be the strongest character in Mushoku Tensei if not for Orsted. Orsted would be the complete warrior that Laplace would have built, because Orsted would have mastered every single one of Laplace's techniques. Whether it would be battle aura based or magic based, Rudeus would take after the demon god version of Laplace, the magic side of him, which would make him the strongest mage in the series outside of the two dragon boys. To put this into perspective, Laplace had a spell that was so strong it split body Gotti from the fighting god armor and caused the giant dent in the Mushoku Tensei world map that we call the Ringus Sea. If Laplace's magical power was at this level to make a feat this strong, theoretically, Rudeus could create the same feat if not a better one, because on more than one occasion it has been stated that his magical power is greater if not on par with Laplace's. So his magic could cause continental damage if he pushed it that far, if he had access to a god class spell. But personally, if his magic output were to match that, who says he can't put enough magical force and power into a stone cannon that could potentially create damage of that caliber, especially when Rudeus has nuclear magic at his disposal. Now Rudeus has a lot of magic, from simple offensive spells to healing magic and even creating defensive barriers. The two most valuable assets in his arsenal would be the fact that he can do a voiceless incantation. Rather than saying a spell, he would actually create one by feeling it. And he would do this over and over again until he would remember the feeling that he would feel when casting that spell. This would create a huge advantage, because in combat a skilled fighter would destroy a mage's lungs or lacerate their throat so they could no longer cast spells. If you cannot use your voice, you are not voicing any incantations. Rudeus does not have this issue, and we see this as he fights Orsted. In a very grounded magical world, this would give him a very major advantage. And on top of this, the demon Empress Kishirika gave him one of her demon eyes. From the demon eye that he received, he would have the ability to look into the future. When he is fighting any foe, no matter what the level is, he would be able to see their next move. The only time this would really not work for Rudeus would be when an opponent is significantly faster than him. But outside of this, he can look 10 seconds into it. On top of this, Kishirika would give him another demon eye. But this demon eye isn't really that practical for combat. He'd only be able to look in longer distances. As for the magic at his disposal, we're going to organize it by rank. These ranks would be rank 1, beginner for basic mana manipulation, intermediate for intermediate, advanced for advanced. These are typically when we start to see magics that can basically begin to take out crowds or hordes of soldiers. Now these next ones are rough estimates. Saint could basically take out a building, Kingly a small town, Emperor a large town if not a city. Then you'd have god level magic that would take out a continent. Now Rudeus's most basic magic would be to conjure a water ball and fireball. These would be the first magics that he would use at the beginning of the series, with water being the first. And this would ultimately lead to him becoming a water emperor mage, using his staff Aqua Hartia, which would ultimately boost the effectiveness of all water-based magic. And of course, that doesn't mean he cannot use other magic types. He's just more effective with water. It would cost less energy for him to use spells that are water based with his water staff. The most basic water spells that he would learn would be Water Ball, pretty self-explanatory. Makes a spherical projectile of water. Water Shield, which allows the user to create a waterfall / shield from the ground and create a wall out of it. This would be so potent it could block fire from a dragon. Then you have Water Arrow, where he concentrates water into a bolt and uses it to decimate a target. Ice Smash, where he basically hits you with a giant ice mound or rock. And finally, Ice Blade, where you make a sword out of ice. Even though Rudeus doesn't use all of these spells, because he has bread and butters and he doesn't necessarily have a use for them, he could still actually use them if the situation arised for it. Rudy could make an Ice Blade, and he can fully utilize that, because Rudy has trained under the style of the Sword God, but understands the basics of the other two styles, North and Water God, as well. I can't stress this enough, Rudy has a lot of options in combat, it's just that he doesn't typically need to use those options. Not only because his magic would just simply be that broken that he'd only need to use a few spells, but his party members like Aris would be, aka top 3, if not arguably the best swordsman in all of Mushoku Tensei outside of Geno Britz. As for the rest of his spells, he can manipulate the rain with Squall, create a blizzard, create cumulonimbus clouds, and make lightning strike his opponents, manipulate ice by freezing everything around him, creating an ice fortress, and so on and so forth in terms of water. Up next we have Earth, and typically Rudy is making earth walls or using his go-to attack, Stone Cannon. Now I would like to say, despite Stone Cannon being an intermediate spell, that it can do damage beyond that of your stereotypical intermediate one. Because of Rudy's brains and magical ability, he can push this spell beyond its normal capabilities and damage characters like Orsted or even kill Bodygotti. The same would go for his Earth Lance and other earth spells along those lines, such as Sand Cloud, when Rudy can create a bunch of sand in the air to make it so that his opponents can no longer breathe or see him. This same ability has stronger variations with Dust Storm or even conjuring a giant sandstorm. My personal favorite would be the Earth Hedgehog, when Rudy would create this ball of dirt, and it'll flow on over to the ground and create spikes from underneath his opponents, impaling them. And similar to the water's ice fortress, he can make an earth fortress, a rock fortress. All of the spells kind of have sharing variations of each other, like water and earth cannon. And that would be it in terms of earth magic. As for wind magic, we're going to start this off with Wind Slice, where you basically create a torrent of wind, and it's so sharp that it cuts its opponents. Blast, which is the equivalent of a Fusaro Da. Wind Blast, where you use wind, but use an enormous amount of it to push yourself in any direction or push opponents away. Then you can also bind down opponents with Wind Bind. And the strongest variation of all the blast-like abilities would be Sonic Blast, a sonic boom that can propel you or another object forward with enough force to destroy walls or crack skulls. Other than these blasts, you can create tornadoes, storms, or use tornado impact to make your punches strong enough to punch holes through your opponent. Up next, we'd have Fire Magic. Fireball, obviously. Heat Hand, I mentioned these before, but here are the more interesting abilities. Heat Island, if you're standing in a specific area, you can burn everything around you. The stronger variant of this would be Burning Palace, which would engulf anyone in a close proximity in flames. And similar to Windblade, we would have Flame Slice, which would be a concentrated fire attack that can cut through many objects. Then there are your more basic abilities like a flamethrower, creating fire pillars, explosions, or even more fireballs. But the strongest abilities would be Exodus Flame, which is so strong it can actually damage its caster. but can create an explosion violent enough to destroy a forest. Then we would have Magma Gush, where you can basically create bursts of lava, and the strongest one, which would be Flash Over, which would basically create flames in a wide area in an instant. Now, as a skilled mage, Rudeus would have a lot of unique spells, one of which would be his Quagmire spell, where he basically creates quicksand. And he would actually receive the name of this spell as a nickname for himself with how often he uses it. The next one would be a variation of Stone Cannon, his explosive Stone Cannon. It's basically the same Stone Cannon, but it would have explosive properties. Another one of his unique spells would be Electric. It's basically an electric shock that is very strong against opponents who use Battle Aura or Toki. On top of this, he would have the ability to paralyze his opponents with sound due to howling magic. And on top of all of this, out of every single magic that I mentioned, the most impressive one would be the nuclear explosion that he would have used against Orsted. Even though I've covered mainly offensive and elemental magic, Rudeus can still heal himself, create barriers, and so on and so forth. But outside of the nuclear magic and everything else I've mentioned, the biggest thing in his ability would be Disturb magic. Kryptonite against every magician in the series, including Orsted. When you're in the middle of casting a spell, Rudeus can disturb it and cut your magic off. Now, outside of Rudeus being a mage that has swordsmanship skills, there's something a little more outstanding about him. And that would be the fact that he has a magic mech suit that is constantly getting upgraded, and he actually used this to fight against Orsted. This baby has a Gatling gun in a medieval world. Let that sink in. This thing is so strong, it would enhance Rudeus' speed, power, and physical defense to match even the world's most powerful warriors. At 30% of power output, he would have been able to defeat mostly every opponent that he's encountered from this point in the series. The magic armor is so fast it can move 200 kilometers per hour. With it, Rudy could jump several meters in the air with ease, and his punches would leave giant craters in the ground. And with it, he'd still be able to use his wand and obviously the Gatling gun. Alongside the Gatling gun, he'd have a shotgun that would be able to shoot multiple stone cannons from it, all at once. This shotgun fire would almost be instantaneous. This shotgun would be no joke, because this would literally be Rudy's iconic move, his specialty, the stone cannon, but he's shooting 10 of them at once. And one of them was capable of killing the fighting god. So in a fantasy world, Rudeus would be a master mage with almost alien-like modern technology at his side, between Gatling guns, shotguns, and power armor. And on top of this, Rudeus gets only stronger, because the way he was even able to develop these weapons, this foreign technology, was because of his future self, Old Man Rudeus, probably the strongest version of Rudeus. He wrote a diary with instructions on how to build these things so his past self could use them. Old Rudeus has magic that allows him to travel through time. He can even manipulate gravity and electricity, and even regrow his arms, make things levitate, and says, "I'm sure you have begun to realize it, but magic in this world is all powerful. Once you understand that, you can accomplish just about anything. All it takes is time, research, and practice." Old Man Rudeus would be on a completely different level in terms of magical ability, if the time travel in itself didn't, say that enough. At some point, he'd even be able to use his gravity magic to fly. He would even have teleportation. He would get so strong that he would say that none of his power has any meaning, because by the time he got strong enough, the people he wanted to protect were all gone. This would be a major contrast from what we got from the original Rudeus that we see throughout the series. Granted, the younger Rudeus would have these stronger armors and equipment by far. As an overall mage, Old Man Rudeus eclipses all of younger Rudeus's abilities. Then you take into account that younger Rudeus wouldn't have this equipment if it wasn't for his future self traveling back in time and giving him blueprints through his diary for it. That should just tell you how much of a badass old man Rudeus is. Because he would be the sole reason why Rudeus would be able to handle all of these fights later on in the series, because he would have gave him the power armor that he uses throughout the series to fight. The same armor that he fought Orsted in the other 7 great powers. I feel like if old man Rudeus were to use the other models of the MKs, alongside his insane magic abilities, he could probably be top 3 if not top 5 in the entire series. Now with all that being said, Mushoku Tensei is a lot more grounded with his powers, but its characters are still extremely strong. I hope this video gave you a nice overview on just how strong Rudeus is and will become throughout the series. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Comment a series you'd like for me to cover next.